Today I'm going to show you how I spin fluff, like from sheep, into yarn that you might use for knitting or crocheting. Didn't know anybody still spun their own yarn? We sure do! Stick around and find out! I'm spinning yarn on a spinning wheel. This is one of those kind of weird things that are not all that common anymore, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about it. For some of you die-hard fiber arts people, seeing somebody spinning may not be unusual, but I know for a lot of us, this is something that you didn't know had happened anytime in the last 100 years. But it totally does. There are lots and lots of us who enjoy spinning our own yarn from fiber, which can come from a whole bunch of different places, but spinning it into yarn that we can then use for knitting or crocheting or weaving, or to sit on our shelf and look pretty because it's too special for us to do anything with. So I just wanted to give you a quick little overview on kind of how this works. So the first part of how it works is there's kind of two things that you need to be able to spin yarn. One, you need fiber. You need something to spin. And funny story, when I first started spinning, I got the tool for spinning first because I wanted to spin newspaper into yarn. So I cut little strips of newspaper and I learned to spin by spinning newspaper into yarn. Don't ask me why that was what I wanted to do, but I was very enthusiastic about it. I learned to spin probably almost 15 years ago now, so I've been doing it for a little while. And I've been teaching it for a long time as well. So I have done quite a bit of spinning in my time. But the first thing that you need to get started with spinning is some fluff, some fiber. Most people do not use newspaper. That's weird. But most people do use, this is wool. So wool comes from sheep, and there are a million different breeds of sheep. There's different breeds of sheep, just like there's different breeds of dogs, and all of their wool is going to have different characteristics. So you have some really, really itchy stuff that makes horrible sweaters that make you scratch all day, and then you have like the really, really nice and soft stuff. And you can dye it all kinds of exciting, bright colors. You can have all sorts of, like, you can have all the same color, all different colors, not dyed at all. You can also spin animal fiber that comes from things that are not sheep, like alpacas, even silkworms. That's where you get silk from. So first thing you need is the fiber that you're going to spin. Second thing you need is the equipment that you're going to use to spin it. So the spinning wheel is what I've got going here. And this is the one that I think most people who think about spinning, who maybe haven't really tried to do it, think about the spinning wheel. But the spinning wheel is not your only option. So the way that I got started, and the way most people get started, is actually something called a drop spindle. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about that now. Drop spindle is this doohickey. It's a very, very straightforward piece of equipment that you can use. It's a stick with a whirl, the disc part of it, and normally they have a hook at the top or at the bottom. And you need fiber, so this is the same fiber. I just pulled it apart a little bit more because you have more things to think about with a drop spindle than you do with a spinning wheel. So with the drop spindle, you're going to take your fluff, you're going to hook it over the hook part, and all you're going to do is pull the fluff until it's the thickness that you want your yarn to be, and then you're going to start it twisting. The trickiest part with the drop spindle, in my opinion, is to make sure that the fluff in your hand doesn't get caught in the spindle itself while it spins around. So this is definitely, it's a little bit of an art form here with this. So other than that, you twist the bottom and you let that twist travel up. Twist at the bottom, let that twist travel up. That's all there is to drop spindle spinning. The longer you have before your drop spindle hits the ground, the longer a strand of yarn you're going to be able to make. As I'm sitting in our yarn truck right now, I don't have a massive length before my drop spindle hits the ground, so I'm not going to be able to make a huge long length of yarn here, but sometimes oftentimes when I do spinning, I will do it from standing up. I've even seen people like sit on the top bunk of a bunk bed and drop it down to do. You can, when you've got a little bit going, you peel it off the top and stick it on the bottom, and then this is where your yarn goes to store it while you spin more. So those are basically the two. There are a million styles of drop spindles, there's a million styles of spinning wheels, but that's kind of the essential. You're putting twist into fiber to make yarn. Honestly, you don't absolutely have to have any kind of equipment. You could just use your hands to twist your fiber. Twist your fiber, that's making yarn. If you put twist into fiber, you made yarn with it. So I hope that that was an interesting little intro into how spinning works. When last we met, it was a couple of days ago, I was just showing you guys how you can create yarn on either a drop spindle or a spinning wheel, which I'll get back to in a minute. And so now, after I have actually finished spinning all of the yarn on these things, I want to show you what the next step is. So what we have created here are called singles, and that means it's just a single strand of yarn. There's just one strand of yarn. Now, this is perfectly acceptable to knit or crochet or weave or whatever other things you like to do with yarn. You don't have to do anything else to this, except do what's called finishing it. So you'll notice it's kind of wibbly wobbly if I leave it just like this. In order to make it not be like you're trying to knit with like ramen noodle soup noodles, to make everything lay nice and flat, generally you want to take your singles, if you're just going to use your singles, and you want to turn them into a loop. Now there are some like fancy tools that let you do this, but you don't actually need any of those. If you've ever wound up a garden hose on your arm, that works fine to do this with as well. Especially if you're doing a smaller skein like this. We're just winding it into a loop. And this is because to create the yarn, we put a bunch of twist in it. And that twist is going to make our stitches do wonky things if we don't sort of set that twist so that it's not so active anymore. So you're just, in order to do that, it's nothing complicated at all. You're just going to wind it into a loop like this. And then we're going to secure the loop together so that our yarn doesn't get all twisted up with itself. So once you wound the whole thing around your arm in a big loop, you can get rid of the drop spindle for the minute. And all we're going to do is just tie all of our ends together, one, so that they're easy to find, and two, so that our yarn doesn't get all tangled up with itself. So you just take, I would always recommend a different colored yarn just so that it's easier to find. You're just going to take that and tie it with the ends together, so that you've got this nice loop of yarn. You're going to want to tie it in a couple more places just so it all, when you do the next step, so that it stays all nice and put together so you don't get it all tangled. Untangling yarn is not my favorite thing to do. And you can see it twists back up on itself. It's supposed to do that. It's because the way that you make yarn is adding twist. And so there's still twist in there. To be completely finished with this and ready to work with it as yarn, you're just going to drop it into a sink full of water, let it sit for a couple of minutes, and wring it back out. And in a few minutes, I'll be showing you the last step, how we actually use the yarn to do stuff with. So that is the very basics of the drop spindle, and then creating yourself some singles yarn to be able to use for different projects. Now we're going to check out the spinning wheel and plying. So the other thing that you can do with yarn before you're ready to use it is you can take multiple of those singles strands that we created and you can twist them together. That's called plying your yarn. And when you think about yarn that you go to the store and buy, most of the time that's plied yarn. That's going to make your yarn thicker. It's going to make it a little bit stronger. And so I wanted to show you how I do plying on the spinning wheel. You can ply on a drop spindle exactly the same as a spinning wheel. It just goes faster, for me at least. So I have finished, Let's see if I can hold this up without dumping it everywhere. I have a very highly sophisticated piece of machinery here. It's one of those boxes that the little clementine oranges come in, and then shish kebabs sticks to hold these things in place. But I have twisted the singles that I made on the spinning wheel onto these little, they're called storage bobbins, onto these little bobbins to hold them so that I can use them for plying. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take two strands, two of the singles that I made, and I am going to twist them together. I'm just going to do it on the spinning wheel. So you are going to set it up the same way that we did when we spun our singles, except when we were doing singles, your spinning wheel is going in one direction, and now that I'm doing a ply, I'm going the other direction on the spinning wheel, and that's what's going to make it be yarn and not just two strands of singles next to each other. So twisting it the other way is what makes that happen. And so this is creating that twist them together effect. And I've got, right now, I have 2 strands of yarn twisted together. So this is called a two-ply. If you noticed, when I showed you my highly sophisticated machinery for plying, there were 3 little bobbins in there. So guess what I'm going to show you next? How to do a 3-ply. After you have mastered the idea of putting multiple strands together, you can put as many strands together as you want. There aren't any rules about how many or how few. So you can do 2, you can do 3, you can do 37. Most people don't do 37 because it takes a long time. Every single you have to spin on its own, and then the more you use together, the more of your time it took to create the singles before you're plying them. So I'm going to show you how I switch from a 2-ply to a 3-ply now. So now that I've spun a little bit of the 2-ply yarn, I want to show you guys a trick for when you're switching. I like to do little samples. I like to see what things look like a bunch of different ways. But I don't love taking all the yarn off my bobbin and starting all over again. So when I'm going to switch and do a 3-ply, I'm just going to stick a little piece of yarn that's a really different color. I'm going to stick it, this is my 2-ply that I've been working on all along. Then this is the 3rd strand that's coming from my, my bobbins. I'm going to put that against here, and I'm just going to hold that different colored yarn with it so that when I'm ready to take this all off, I know where the split is between the two things. And otherwise, I just stick 3 strands next to each other and start spinning. So it is not any more complicated to do a ply with multiples, with 3 instead of 2. It's all going to be about the same, and the more strands you add, the thicker and sort of rounder and squishier your yarn is going to be compared to a yarn that's a little bit more flat or a little bit more harsh, maybe, would be a good word to describe a 2-ply. Tends to be a little bit less springy and bouncy and squishy. So there are pros and cons to doing any different number of plies in terms of how thick your yarn is, how sturdy your yarn is, how squishy your yarn is, how it shows the color of the singles that you've been doing different ways, all kinds of that. So I'm pretty sure I said it at the beginning, but spinning is one of those minutes to learn, lifetime to master kind of a skills. Once you know the basics of putting some twist and some fiber, you know how to spin. But there are 7,000 million other parts of it to learn, and you can go as far into that as you want to, or stay as superficially as you want to. So this is the spinning the 3-ply yarn, and then the last step is going to be taking it off of this wheel and setting the twist in this, just like we set the twist in the singles that we did from the drop spindle. And if you watched me wind the singles from the drop spindle and thought that looked like it took forever and was a little bit awkward, there are tools to do that faster. So this is called a nitty knotty, and this is going to be a way to create a loop a little bit faster. You wind it around here, and it creates a bigger loop. It just goes a little bit faster and creates a bigger loop easier than wrapping around your hand. So you don't need tons of equipment, but if you get real into it, there are other gadgets that you can get to go with this. I also have a very adorable tiny one, which I will be using to wind my 2-ply and 3-ply from my wheel onto, so that I have my small little wraps. So join me in another few minutes and we'll look at what all of these different plies look like as finished yarns, and then even knit and crocheted up to see how spinning changes the way the fiber looks as you do it in different ways. The last thing that I wanted to go through with the spinning pieces that I did is actually working these pieces up with the different spinning techniques, the different numbers of plies. I wanted to work them up into knit and crochet pieces so you could actually see what they looked like when you created fabric with them. So I'll get a little bit closer to the screen here. The top row is the singles, and I can see with the knitted piece and the crocheted piece, when you're working with the singles of the yarn, you've got that color stays more consistent, so you're getting a little bit of a striping effect because you have a longer section of the darker color orange and then a longer section of the lighter color orange together. So you're not getting multiple strands of different colors twisting together. It's staying a little bit more consistent. So this you're going to get with the singles, you're going to get more continuous sort of a self-striping pattern compared to if we look at the 2-ply here, you're really getting much more of a marled effect when you look at the 2-ply crocheted piece versus the 1-ply crochet piece. And the same thing with the knitted piece. You've got the 2-ply knitted piece, you're just getting a lot of marl color happening compared to the single piece. It's going to be a lot more consistent color-wise. But the other way around, your singles, you've got a lot more difference in the thickness of your yarn versus when you're looking at the 2-ply, you have a lot more consistent in the thickness. So you have those different effects that you get with the different spinning techniques. And then the same thing when we look at the 3-plies. We did 3-plies in two different ways. We did the 3-ply where we plied it with itself, the Navajo plying, and that in the knitted version in particular, you can really see that stripe happening because we did 3-plies of yarn. You get that nice even thickness of yarn. You don't get the thick and thin parts, but when we're plying 3 with each other in that Navajo style, you get that color consistency that's really giving you those more distinctive stripes that are not as marled. When you're looking at the exact same, this is 3-ply, you've got the exact same amount of consistency with your actual yarn in terms of the thickness. You've got that marled look. I think it's more obvious in the knitted version, that real marled look to your fabric compared to the when you're plying with itself. So you've got the Navajo ply where you're taking one continuous strand of yarn and doubling it back on itself, and that's going to give you the more consistent color, versus the exact same 3-plies, but they're coming from 3 different parts of the yarn that you have spun, and you're bringing 3 parts in that are not related to each other in terms of color, so you're getting a lot more marled effect. So I just think it's interesting to see how you turn your hank of fiber, so you've got your 4-ounce braid of fiber, and there are a huge number of different ways that you can spin it and ply it together that are all going to affect the way your final fabric looks. And the more experienced with spinning you get, the more you can intentionally control what your fabric is going to look like to almost design the fabric that you want in the spinning stage, which can just be a lot of fun to play with and can give you another layer of control and artistic design in your finished pieces. So I hope you found all of the information about spinning interesting, and if that's something that you are interested in getting started with, we do have beginning spinning kits, or there are lots of other places if you have a local spinning or yarn shop near you that you could check out. If you liked the video that you just saw, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the little bell to do whatever the little bell does, so that you get all of our content as soon as we get it up. Also, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're super active and we share the same kind of thing at Nomad Yarns.